Many Canadians are still wondering why Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would go on a holiday in Tofino, BC on the day of the inaugural National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilley. Now, Brian, the PM brought forth the day of reflection to honor many in our Indigenous communities, but instead of being at a ceremony which he was allegedly invited to in Kamloops, he flew right past Kamloops on his way to Vancouver Island.
Yeah, it was bizarre. It was a colleague of mine, Brian Passafume at the Toronto Sun, who broke the story because Brian is, let me give you the backstory here. He's an aviation geek and he sits there with browser windows open, tracking flights all the time. He tracks military flights, government flights, and he has an alert for the Prime Minister's plane being in the air. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, ping, it goes off. It says the PM's in the air. And Brian told me, he said, I'm watching it. And I said, oh, it's heading west. He must be going to Winnipeg for a ceremony for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. When he bypassed Winnipeg, he thought, okay, well, he's on track to land at Regina. Maybe he's going to Regina and then down to the Cowessess First Nation. Again, bypass that. So he thought, must be Kamloops. Once he passed Kamloops, he thought, don't tell me he's going to Tofino. And of course, that's where he landed. And, a lot of Liberal supporters upset that we would dare report, that any media would report that the Prime Minister was in Tofino at an $18 million luxury mansion dubbed a surfer's paradise by the realtor that's trying to sell it. But he created the day. He created the day and then he did a dishonor to it. With his actions, Hal, he turned it from a day of reflection into the Indigenous long weekend. So that you may as well just say to your buddy, so what are you doing for the Indigenous long weekend? Going to a cottage? Like, want to go surfing? It was that type of reaction. And it's mind-boggling that he thought he could do it and get away with it. He has since apologized to First Nations leaders. He said he will visit Kamloops soon. That apology only came because he got caught. And quite frankly, Al, I'm shocked the reaction is what it was. I thought that this is something that conservatives would be upset about, that liberals would say, oh, it's great, don't worry about it. And a lot of other Canadians would shrug. No, it was near universal condemnation of the Prime Minister's actions. And the few people that were sitting there saying, well, a man deserves a holiday, sure, but he could have left the day after. He could have stopped for a couple of hours in Kamloops on his way to Tofino. And I will add this, he took a vacation in the Muskokas just before the election was called. So he goes to Ontario's cottage country for a week before the election, calls the election that nobody wanted, then takes another vacation right after the election. We pay a pretty penny for a beautiful cottage in the Gatineau Hills, just across the river on the Quebec side from his official residence in Ottawa. It is a private lake with everything a man and his family could want. Why didn't he go there? So many questions, so many problems with this trip.
Now, Brian, with this latest trip to British Columbia and Tofino, will Trudeau face calls to resign as Prime Minister?
I don't know. I mean, my answer would be he should, but my answer is always that he should resign. I will say this, I said nearly universal condemnation. One media outlet that is very friendly to him, let's be honest, the Toronto Star was set up over 100 years ago by supporters of Sir Wilfrid Laurier to be the voice of liberalism in Canada. And they defend him all the time. They didn't with this. They put out a scathing editorial denouncing him. The CBC, they were trying to be cute on the first day. They got a lot of backlash, and by the second day they weren't. But there was a cartoon in the Star that showed three different newspaper headlines, and the first one said unnecessary election. Then it said unnecessary vacation. Then they showed you the third newspaper, and it showed Chrystia Freeland, Mark Garneau, Harjit Sajjan, and other cabinet ministers staring at the newspaper that said unnecessary leader. Some liberals are going to say he has to go. I've seen commentary from smart columnists who say they think he's going to go. I myself wrote one that said, I don't think he will. I'm not sure what he would do. He doesn't have the options that other world leaders do when they leave. I don't think he's going to have companies banging down his door to sit on their corporate boards of directors. And I doubt he wants to go back to the speaking circuit to be a motivational speaker. So plus, I think he's a fighter and he wants to stick around. So I don't think he'll go. We'll have to wait and see if people inside his own party say, you know what? Your time's up.
Brian, let's talk about Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole. Many within the Tory caucus, within the ranks, are calling for a leadership review. He's apparently facing some serious leadership challenges. Will O'Toole survive?
I think so. There's a lot of anger. A lot of it is centered around people like Mark Strahl, Shannon Stubbs, and others who are, let's be honest, allied and loyalist to former conservative leader Andrew Scheer. This is the old story in politics, different factions battling it out. And Aaron O'Toole has to figure out how to heal those wounds and move forward. There was a caucus meeting on Tuesday, and as he put it, this was the first time he's ever had to have been able to have his whole caucus in one room because of the pandemic. But they had an in-person meeting. They voted for four different motions, four different rules that are part of the Reform Act, including one that would allow um, party members, caucus members specifically, to attempt to vote him out. Now, that doesn't mean that they will. It just means that the party has allowed these rules to go on, just like they did. They voted in favor of them after the 2015 election and after the 2019 election. This is part of the Parliament of Canada Act now. Parties have to say they will either follow these rules or not by a vote. So O'Toole, if he's going to be removed, would have to have 20 MPs sign a letter with their names on it and send it to the National Caucus chair. You need at least 20 MPs. If you get that, well, then you can go forward and have a secret ballot vote. So that's several steps away. Andrew Scheer did not face that. They voted in favor of these same measures after the 2019 election, but he didn't leave because of a caucus vote. Andrew Scheer left of his own volition because eventually he said, as he told me sitting in his office, Brian, I don't have the fight left in me. He was facing a lot of leaks and problems. There was the whole school expenses scandal, and he just decided, you know what, I'm done. I don't think that's the mindset Aaron O'Toole is in. And so far, all they've been able to find is that for August and September, I think it was, of last year, the House of Commons paid his mortgage at a suburban Ottawa home, even though he'd been elected leader. He repaid that once they figured it out a couple months later, and he'd moved into Stornoway. So, a big difference between several $1,000s over several years or $4,000 over 2 months.
Now, some political pundits say it wouldn't be good replacing O'Toole, since that would really make for what, three party leaders over the last 3 years? Wouldn't that really hurt the party's credibility?
I think it would. Yeah, I mean, there's others that have argued, and they've said, look, we should move to an American style primary system. You get one shot. You want to run again, you can run again, but you have to run in a primary. I'm not sure Canadians are ready for that. As Michael Chong, who's being very vocal in his support of O'Toole, said to me, he said Stephen Harper had about 2.5 years to prepare for his first election, and he didn't win. Andrew Scheer had about 2.5 years to prepare for his first election, and he didn't win it. Aaron O'Toole had 11 months before between when he won leadership and when the election was called, in the middle of a pandemic, and he came close but didn't win it. Sean says it would be wrong. Let's do the full review. I'd agree, do a full review, but it has to be more honest, Hal, than the analysis that was given out. There's a place here in Toronto called the Albany Club. It's a conservative private club. They held an event on Tuesday as well. The same day the caucus meeting was being held, with campaign insiders giving an analysis of what went wrong. It wasn't overly truthful. It was all outside forces. That's not the case. The review has to be blunt. It has to examine everything. What went right? There was a lot of good things in this campaign. What went wrong? And then move forward with lessons learned.
Brian, now that the two Michaels are home, Michael Spavor, Michael Kovrig, what does this mean for the future of Huawei in Canada's 5G network?
I don't see how the Trudeau Liberals could approve them, but the Prime Minister has not said that he is going to ban them yet. He absolutely should. And I think eventually he will. In fact, I've spoken to people who believe that it was part of the agreement to get the two Michaels back, that, yeah, you'll release them to us, but we are banning Huawei. Here's the problem. Huawei is already a major component of networks across the country, whether we're talking Bell, TELUS, Shaw, SaskTel. It is a major component of their existing systems. In some cases, it's as much as 90% of certain carriers' networks. It will take a long time to replace that. And of course, it has to be replaced because over time, parts wear out and you're constantly upgrading and repairing. But it's already in the system. This idea that we're going to ban it when it's so integral to what we have is hilarious. This decision should have been taken years ago, even before Kovrig and Spavor were kidnapped. The fact that it wasn't shows why our allies don't trust us on the issue of China anymore. We have been too weak, too compliant, too afraid of the Chinese government. So it will happen eventually, is my belief, but it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
The Trudeau Liberals actually helped our energy sector recently a little bit, invoking the 1977 pipeline treaty to help save Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline, which runs through, I believe, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ontario. Brian, will invoking this treaty really help save the pipeline?
It could, because my understanding of how this treaty works is that it forces the issue to move from a decision of the Michigan government. And the governor of Michigan, a Democrat, has been quite outspoken that she does not want this pipeline to continue, even though her own departments, her own bureaucrats and officials have been green lighting the process of replacing the pipeline and fixing it underwater as it goes through the Straits of Mackinac at the top of Lake Michigan. She's been fine with that, or her officials have been, but politically she is against it. This moves it up towards the Biden administration and the White House and whichever officials he has. That doesn't guarantee, though, Hal, that this will go through. I mean, we have to remember one of his first acts in office was vetoing Keystone, which Donald Trump had approved and Barack Obama had not approved. And it was a political football. The Democrats are anti-oil for a couple of reasons. One, it helps their energy industry. The Americans have increased their own production of oil, especially also shale gas, over the last decade. From when these projects first became political issues, the American production of oil and gas has gone up tremendously. So stopping us helps their industry. Secondly, the Democrats raise an awful lot of money from environmentalists who don't seem to realize that under Democrats, American production of oil and gas has gone up. So environmentalists donate to the Democrats, and they do a nudge and a wink and try and shut us down in order to say, see, we're stopping big bad Canadian oil. So it helps, but it's not a slam dunk. We have to be hopeful, though, because it's jobs in Western Canada, but it's our ability to heat our homes and drive our cars here in central Canada. That's what's at stake.
Brian, the Trudeau Liberals are looking at plans to bring in a national vaccine mandate for all workers. Now, given that both health and most workplaces are provincially regulated, how would this work?
Well, it's something that they were looking at in the spring, and hopefully they've walked away from it. It's difficult to tell. These were documents that were unearthed and released by the media. It showed that they went through the process of saying, how are we going to do this? And what they would have to do is declare that this was something in the national interest, which would still require negotiations with provincial and territorial governments. Look, the overwhelming majority of Canadians are vaccinated, either first shot or second shot. It's here in Ontario, I can tell you it's over 86% of eligible people have their first shot, and over 80% have their second shot. And people continue to show up and get vaccinated. So I don't think we need this heavy hand, but it is shocking that the officials working for the Trudeau government did look into this. Federally regulated workplaces only account for about 10% or less of all employees of all workplaces. Most of us work in areas, outside of broadcasting, trucking, banking. Those are federally regulated. But me, an ink-stained wretch, I'm in a provincial workforce. If you're in most offices, you are in a provincially regulated system. So it would be incredibly difficult for them to do this and would create an incredible backlash. Doesn't mean they wouldn't, just probably why they did walk away from it back in the spring.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.